World Jam Global Radio. This is Clarity. This is Clarity.
Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time.
Once again, I want to say a big good evening going out to all you listeners right across the globe.
Back in the day,
it's Kervin, Julien right here with Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio.
It was do or die. I had too many rivals.
And we do have a very intriguing show for you tonight.
I learned my lessons in the streets. There was not a man I couldn't beat. I was good with my hands and very quick on my...
We have an old-time friend,
women. I had
Mr. Charlie Grabsby.
I was getting money. Life was so sweet. Now things have changed. The whole game has been rearranged. I'm a changed man. Don't need no gun in my hand.
Unfortunately, Dr. David Romay can't be with us tonight.
To spend it all in jail.
Which is a real shame.
Trying to cope with this living.
Because I think this debate would have been right up his street.
I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
Can't believe that there are many people
I paid for my crime
who have not paid any attention to the politics and the elections that are going on in the United States of America as we speak.
I was a drug dealer.
Campaigning has been fierce,
but I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud.
There's no love lost.
That's why I'm telling my story to you.
And already there's plenty of blood spilled.
I must admit, I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now sit back and think it over since I've gotten older.
There's a WikiLeaks, a Wikipedia, emails of Hillary Clinton.
Numb, I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody.
There's the racist vitriol of Donald Trump.
Meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real alligator, especially all you haters.
The opening statements are going on right now. He could be facing life in prison.
And yet, although he shows a friendly face, suspicion still hangs over the head of Bernie Sanders. But tonight we're going to try and unravel some of the questions that you have burning on your chest. Some of the things that are on the tip of your tongue.
Pay for my crime. Already did my time. Pay for my crime. Pay for my crime. Pay for my crime. Pay for my crime.
Just to remind you that you can join us on www.worldjamglobal.com.
I pay for my crime. I'm trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life on track and have the right to vote and live like an ordinary citizen again. This is my message to all of my friends in the pen, statewide.
You can join the chat room.
There was not a man I could...
Or you can stay in contact with us at Issues Today Radio on Twitter.
I had girls all
at
over the
Issues Today on the Facebook.
So sweet.
World Jam Global Radio Facebook.
Rearranged. I'm a changed man, don't need no gun in my hand. It ain't about being no gangster. Life is too short to spend it all in jail.
Oh, there's so many ways that you can stay in touch with the show.
Hell, already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
On a day where
did my time.
Where the world mourns the loss of Muhammad Ali, Cassius Clay.
I was a drug dealer.
Where Louisville loses a son.
But I never got high on my own supply. I'm not proud of what I had to do. That's why I'm telling my story to you and you.
On the day that Serena Williams
I was doing all kind of stupid shit. Now
failed to equal Steffi Graf's
the life I used to
Grand Slam record.
I was young and dumb, my brain was so numb. I was a real Forrest Gump, but I was nobody's chump. Me and Billy the Kid had a lot in common. I was the real Terminator, much meaner than Arnold Schwarzenegger. I'd chew you up and spit you out like a real...
On this day,
especially all you haters.
Right here on World Jam Global, on Issues Today.
Already did my time. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
We ask this question. Is the voting rigged in the United States presidential election campaign?
Well. cope with this living hell.
Just a reminder that there will be no gospel show tomorrow morning.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Trying to cope with this living hell. This living hell. This living hell. This living hell. Already did my time. I paid for my crime.
So whatever you're doing, my friends, wherever you are across the globe, hopefully you've got your cup of tea or your cup of coffee handy.
Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
You're sat down and you're ready for the latest edition of Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio.
Against us, and lead us not into temptation, but deliver.
Our guest, Charlie Graspy, has been a long-time friend.
Glory forever and ever. Amen.
Features on many debates, especially when it comes to corruption, police brutality, and prosecutorial misconduct.
All those drive-by killings, stop.
But tonight, my friends,
it ain't about nothing.
Charlie joins us for a different battle altogether.
Let him cast it first.
The battle for the hot seat, the battle for the White House.
Trying to get this felony off my back so I can get my life.
Who's going to get there?
And have the right to vote.
And how far will they go to get there?
This is my message to all of my friends.
Who will they stand on? Who will they run across?
Worldwide. And put down those...
How badly are they prepared to lie? And what skeletons do we expect to see coming out of the cupboard as this cat fight begins to heat up?
World Jam Global Radio. This is clarity.
So without no further ado, let me introduce you to Charlie Graspy. Hey, good evening, Charlie.
Hey, Kervin, how you doing?
Not bad at all. Been a long while since we've spoken. It's really great to have you back with us right here on Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio. Why don't you tell the listeners just a little bit about yourself, the journey that you've had so far, activism that you've been involved with, and then finally leading them into why we're having this show today.
Well, I mean, I guess in general, if one was to reflect back on my life, for the first 20 years of my life, I was dedicated to being a scientist and a medicine person. I actually preferred veterinary medicine because animals don't intentionally harm, and I really wasn't enamored with the general way that people act. So that's what I wanted to be. My mother was a lawyer growing up. Both my mother and my father were highly active in the Democratic Party. You could say I grew up in the local Democratic headquarters, an institution that no longer exists in America, but used to be, up until very recently, the foundation of the political parties. But I didn't want to do that path. But I grew older, and I looked around me, and all the years that I had questioning what was going on in society and seeing problems, I approached it like I approach everything, as I attempt to study. And when I study anything, I start with the history and the philosophy that guides and shaped that area of thought and of practice. And so I, unfortunately, when I look back, I say now, I became a political scientist by academic training and a leading political theorist. I switched from scientific endeavors to the study of government. And in that study, I in particular wanted to understand the questions of why America was failing to live up to its democratic potential and promises. And before I actually ever formally studied in any department, I was able to see that what I assumed was that people didn't really have good choices. Every time an election came about, the people were told vote for Party A or Party B, and Party A and Party B put up if you looked in America and you said, "Is this the best and the brightest?" You'd say, "Not even close." I mean, we're given choices that are often patently offensive, usually weak and really just professional politicians. And it's that professional politician kind of concept that really is at the core of the problem. But what I was able to see is that those parties, and having only two of them, always put up those professional politicians. And in that sense, there's not a dime's worth of difference between the two. I'm not talking about which set of policies one candidate and one party chooses. I'm talking about in terms of the way they approach government and the way they envision it, they're effectively the same. They're about power, they're about personal position, and they use policy to get that power and position. They're not dedicated to that policy, which is why you see them jumping from one policy to another when the wind blows different, or following the polls, or why a Democrat like Trump can run as a Republican, even though people may say he's a weak Democrat, or a Republican, weak as she may be, like Clinton, runs as a Democrat. And of course, there are people, her followers are going to say, "Oh my God, no, she's not a Republican." Well, define what a Republican is and define what a Democrat is. And what you're going to get oftentimes are a set of principles. Yet those parties have abandoned those principles long ago. And America almost never in its history had principled parties like you have in Europe and in the UK. You know, Labour, although of course UK has Americanized its party process and its elections process since the 80s, with Thatcher adopting and bringing in Republican strategists to run her campaign, and then Labour becoming New Labour under Blair, following in the same footsteps, doing much like Clinton did to the Democratic Party, and making Labour the un-Labour party. You know, there's nothing about Labour in the New Labour of Blair that had anything to do with the principles that Labour was for all of its history. He rejected it, and it became a mere tool in the two-party battle of we'll camp out on these issues and divide the electorate in half. Would
you say then that the socialism had gone out of the Labour Party, because that's what Labour had always set themselves up as over the years, was a
absolutely
socialist.
Intentionally, and just as Clinton, what happened was Clinton and the Democratic elite freaked out when they lost the presidency to Reagan in the 80s, and these are people who were always conservative, not progressive, and liberal and conservative are actually two sides of. They're not two sides of the same coin. They are the same coin. I mean, they're just two variations on the theme. And of course, the liberal-conservative dichotomy comes from 19th century British party politics. But we can get into that in a little bit. But yes, the left was removed consciously from the left party in the U.S., and then Tony Blair followed the same in the UK. And it won, and it worked. It won. The problem is, as a long-term strategy, it means that you move the entire system to the right. And no matter which side wins, the left always loses. So you might get less right from one and more right from the other, but you're always moving in the direction of the right. And yes, those social policies, which in America you use the word socialist, and my God, everybody runs around in their, post-McCarthy, hysteria, because most Americans are clueless and uneducated and uninformed, even if they have an education. And so the word socialism means communism, and communism means the Soviet Union, which is totalitarianism. And oh my God, this is awful. You got to run away. I mean, every time I hear it, I feel like I'm watching my Python. Run away.
Yeah. Here's the thing that most people might say in the UK, is that the Labour Party had been taken such a beating over a long period of time by Thatcher and the Thatcherites, that some people probably felt that in order for Labour to be elected, they would have to change the way they approached politics and communicated with people in order to make themselves electable. The big problem that they made that then happened was, and I think I stand in agreement with you, that is that you then had a Labour Party that was only Labour by name but Conservative in action. And so,
Well, exactly.
so all you had was
logic.
a replacement for the Conservatives that was just being run by a Labour minister, and it's rotated ever since.
Listen to your own words on how you described it, which is quite accurate. We're having trouble winning on our principles, so let's abandon our principles because the objective is not principles but winning.
Yeah,
and then the masses of people are conned by the party elites into saying, but if you get us to win, eventually we can come back to the principles.
But they never did.
You've already abandoned the principles.
Exactly.
You don't have principles. But that's a new phenomenon in British party politics. British parties used to be very philosophically, principally based. Never in the history of United States political parties has there been, in the major parties, now the Green Party or the Libertarian of today, and some parties in the past that are quote unquote minor parties, which is a side effect or a very direct effect of using winner-take-all elections, which only the U.S. and U.K. use in the modern world because those elections are inherently undemocratic. But those elections, according to the only social science law that can be considered a law, which is Duverger's law, winner-take-all elections produce a two-player dynamic, meaning they so overfavor the two major players that the minor players fall by the wayside. And it's even more so in the U.S. where we are so large and there's not very, very strong local constituencies or local parties. And in fact, since the 80s, both the Republicans and the Democrats have basically dismantled the one sort of almost democratic foundation they had, which was the local party organizations used to run the party. Now it's all national committee, which runs the national party, and it's presidency focus. Which, by the way, you got to understand why they're president focused. It's not because the president is so much more important. It's twofold. One, the theory that they operate, which comes from the academic elites, the political scientists, my discipline, which I would be a heretic among most of them. In this, but what they argue is that the parties are not supposed to be democratic; they're supposed to be elite. People aren't capable of self-governance. So the theory was that you can't really have that kind of a principle-based party, and you can't have. I'm sorry, I lost my train. I was gonna make 2 points there, and I can't remember where I started that. I went on too far with that.
But let me just come in here with a quick thought. The problem that we've got in our country, in the UK in particular, before we move on to the US, is this: once upon a time there was a clear, definitive line that separated the two major parties. Because there have always been other parties in the fringe, the Liberals or the Liberal Democrats or the Democrats. They've always been there or thereabouts. And then you've had other little, smaller parties, independent parties that have a challenge. But the two main parties have always been Labour and Conservative, just as you have in the US.
Well, no. Let me correct you there. Labour only became one of the two main parties with Blair.
Right.
Labour was the third party.
Not necessarily so. There was a time when it diminished, but prior to that, it had always been Labour and Conservative. Right?
Immediately after the war and in the 60s, Labour rose. But from the early 1800s...
Labour were the third party for a very small time. But let me just continue with what I'm trying to say here, because here's the issue. Right? The issue was that there was a clear, definitive, distinctive political stance between the two parties. You was always able to know the difference in policies and programs that were being set up by these two parties as they went into battle on every single election. The problem we have now here in the UK, for me in particular, as I look towards our leaders when elections or even local elections come about, you can't tell the difference anymore. Nowadays, instead of having two definitive, clear policies, right, where you can tell that that's a Labourite and that's a Conservative, what you now have is the two of them fighting, basically saying, we'll do the same thing, but we'll just do it better than they will. Whatever the issue is, they're all going to do it. They're all going to do it. They're all going to do the same thing. But their only argument now is that we're just going to do it better than the other one. Yeah, we're going to do that too, but we'll do it better than...
Because it's all about party and winning for party.
So therefore, the point that we're trying to make here, as far as the UK is concerned, is that there's no distinction between the parties anymore. All that is you just throw a hatful of issues, and they're all going to do them. These are all the main issues. These are the things that concern the country, but we're just going to do it better than everybody else. There used to be a clear...
And people will argue to the contrary. Oh my God, how can you say there's no difference? There's no difference if you understand the root motivating factors of what drives the parties and where they're aiming. They're aiming to win. They're not aiming for policy. However, there is a difference in which package of policies at any one particular time one party is touting as what they're going to put forward. But the policies aren't the aim and objective or the end. The policies are the means to power, whereas it's supposed to be obtaining power is supposed to be the means to the policies. The policies are then selected for how can we put together a coalition of interests, right? Self-interest, particular interest, not the national interest, not the common good, not the public good, but can we collect a set of interest groups, add them up to vote for our party and get 50% plus one, so more than the other side. And so the parties begin swapping policies, or they claim a policy in elections, but they don't actually follow through when they're in office. The policies are just the means to get people to vote for them. They're not actually what the parties are attempting to do. And that's where there is no difference. Yeah, on the surface, it looks like they're different. You hear, we're for, they're against. We're for this, they're against that. They're against this, we're for that. But they're meaningless when you actually understand they don't care whether they adopt those policies or not. They just want to use the policies for you, the voter, to put them in office, to give them the power. They get into the office, and this is where I was headed before, why it's presidential focused nowadays in America. It's because the president is the perk machine. This is where all the benefits come from. So for the political class, which divides itself into two camps, and they machinate to win for their side, if you control the presidency, you get all the jobs. You get the cabinet position. You get the job working for this administration's department of this. You get this. It's all about distributing the goodies. It's not about because the president is so important in terms of policy. It's so important in terms of power. And as a result, the Democrats have lost Congress, which they held as a majority since the New Deal. When they lost the presidency to Reagan and moved to the right, they gave up Congress. Because Congress enacts policy, and policy isn't the purpose. The purpose is power. Right, and so that's the problem.
Okay, so now I want to move this a little bit. Right, we've taken a little pop at a little look at UK politics and Labour and Conservatives on the whole. And one of the biggest problems that we have here in the UK is that majority of people don't actually come out and vote. And on average, I think when we do have a major election, it's somewhere between 30 and 35% of the population that comes out and votes. And as we're watching it, as it broadcasts live on all night news and news channels and bulletins, etc., you can see where they're winning the constituents, where they're winning the boroughs, the localities, the local areas, etc. And it appears to be pretty even and fair, and you've got a rough idea who's going to win what areas, and then you get the odd shock. Now, here I am in the UK, and many of us are absolutely gobsmacked and flabbergasted, because we've been watching this with ringside seats since this whole thing started. And then you had these the front runners. I never anticipated personally that Donald Trump would be a front runner. I just thought that he was going to throw his money in there, enjoy the ride for a while, and then eventually he was going to be shunted out. That was my honest opinion. But here we have it, where we in the UK and many observers around the world are watching this election, watching this campaign, looking at these figures as they come across, and we're asking ourselves, how could this possibly be correct? From what I gather, Bernie Sanders has been winning a lot more than what we think, or what we've been told he's been winning, but yet he's not winning anything. Donald Trump must be the most hated, only second to Hillary, of candidates running for the White House. And yet he seems to be marching on. Now, never before in the history of United States of America politics or election campaigns have we ever seen, ever witnessed such a bad outcome of candidates that are potentially going to sit down and reside in that White House. Now, how have we got here where we've got the probables are going to be Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton? How have we got here when both of them are so corrupt, so hated around the world, right? Got so many illegal stuff hanging over their head, so many investigations going on, so much history of wrongdoing and bad connections and bad companionships. How on earth have we got to this place where the possibility is that the United States of America, the White House and presidential campaign is going to be won by one of these two vandals, hoodlums?
Well, that's a good question. It's a good question, and it'll enable me to segue into the main topic of is the process rigged? Is the system rigged? Which is the question that we've posed. But I would answer that question as two-party systems are contrary to political science theory, which is American-dominated, contrary to their view that two parties make stability, as if stability was the only goal in government. But a two-party system which limits choices to two and enables organized interests, particularly the most wealthy and powerful, to monopolize the system, is long-term, inherently unstable. And it eventually leads, just like the founders of this country, following in the consensus of 2,000 years of political thought, said since the Greeks, and particularly, articulated well with Aristotle, but not the first to complain about it, that when you have party or faction, which are the same thing, driving the force of government, you will eventually collapse, because it's about the particular interests as opposed to the common good. And common good is also associated with justice, and particular interests are about power. Our interests can outvote you. We get the majority. Your interests lose. We win. And justice is not a part of it. And you have to understand there's a whole academic theory that has been built since the mid-20th century that legitimizes this and that argues it's a good thing. But they are standing in contrast to over 2,000 years of thought from around the globe that said that is the worst possible thing. And it is exactly what the founders of this country said. And what people don't understand is they don't understand the history of how this country developed and where political parties came in and how they fit or didn't fit. Because you have to understand, the primary goal of the Constitution, which is different than the Bill of Rights, which isn't really a Bill of Rights anyway, it's just the first 10 amendments, but the Constitution is not the amendments, but the operating manual and design for government, national government and its connections to local and state governments. That Constitution was designed with one primary intent: to negate any and all effect of any party that arose. It was not designed to be run by parties, where parties are the motive force, which is what happens today, but it was intended to negate those parties. Everything about the Constitution is designed: the separation of powers, federalism, the large size of the population, and the geography. All of this was built around why the Senate has certain coordinated powers with the president, why the Electoral College was established. All of these things had their primary motive to be the negation of any party from emerging as effective in moving the government forward. It is not intended to be that way. So let's get to the question: is the system rigged? Because we heard Trump, and we certainly hear Bernie Sanders talking about this, and we're hearing a lot of people complaining about rules not being followed and manipulations of this and manipulations of that, party chairs seating delegates, party chairs banging the gavel and ignoring the actual vote went the other way and declaring the vote went her way and the elite way, and banging the gavel and making it official. You know, and of course, and we've seen these throughout American history, but you have to get to the premise first. Before you can ask whether the system is rigged, you have to ask, if all of the rules were followed 100% to the T, would this be a democratic process? Because the question about being rigged is saying it is cheating, it is unfair, and that unfair cheating is leading to an undemocratic result. You have to first ask, is that a valid premise, that the result aimed at in intent is democracy? And the answer is, unfortunately, no, an emphatic no. The party system and the individual parties themselves were consciously designed and intended to be non-democratic. They were intended to be elite-driven entities. And in fact, in the mid-century, when the American political scientists really legitimized the concept of parties for the first time, because before that, in America, like in the rest of the world and like in 2,000 years history, people didn't like parties, and parties weren't considered legitimate. They became legitimized only just beyond our lifetime. I mean, just prior to our being born, you and I, did they start to become legitimized. And, you know, in order to do this, the key sort of thinker, the theorist, is a guy named E.E. Schatznyder. And if you read his works, Party Government from, I think, 1942, and then later, as chairman of American Political Science Association, they wrote a committee on political parties. They came up with toward a responsible two-party system, which tried to make America look like the model that they believed, even though this was not accurate either, Britain was following, because they looked to Britain parties as strong, a clear majority, the fusion of powers between the executive and the cabinet, being the executive and the legislature fused together, which is exactly what the founders of this country designed this country not to be, with the separation of powers. But you got to understand, Schatznyder, who develops this concept of party government from a long tradition of about 60 years of advocacy of party government,
based upon, in particular, during the Civil War, Britain was also coming to a process of democratization, whereas most of the world had gone through revolutions, Britain hadn't. And the elites were not in favor of democracy, just like they weren't in America. And along came a guy, two theorists, Walter Bagehot and John Stuart Mill. And Mill looked at the U.S. and said the problem in the U.S. is the lack of representation, which comes from the limitation of choices to just two through a two-party system. And he said, reform the elections process and you'll get democracy. But if you don't, you won't. Walter Bagehot said, we don't want democracy, and what's wrong in America is the separation of powers, and Britain has solved it with its cabinet government and the fusion of powers. So the American political theorists and political scientists, they wanted a fused power system like Britain, but couldn't get it because of the Constitution, and they couldn't amend the Constitution. So they envisioned the parties as, and literally this was the word they used, the bridge to fuse the powers back together. And the founders said, you do that and you create tyranny. But these political scientists rejected that 2,000 years of political thought and said it was completely wrong, primarily because they didn't believe people had the capacity of self-rule. They didn't believe morality existed as a real concept, so they were very scientific and they wanted to take the common good and justice out of the definitions of democracy. In fact, they redefined democracy with the people removed and the common good removed as the people vote every 2 to 4 years in a choice that's given to them by elites of one of two options. And that's it. That's democracy. And that was the whole concept was you need a clear majority. The battle for power should result in an absolutely clear majority. That majority should control government and then should have the opportunity to put its program into effect over the objections of the minority because they got a clear majority power. I mean, these are the very things that the founders of this country said we do not want. But these people rejected that Constitution. So the system was designed to be undemocratic. What Schatznyder said in a famous quote was, particularly when we get to this question, is the process of nominating the president rigged? He said that process shouldn't be democratic. Democracy is the battle between the two parties, and democracy should not exist within either of the parties. All based on this idea that two sets of elites should pick two sets of candidates, and the people should have the mere choice of one or the other. And the responsible word, where they said responsible party government, is that if that party given majority power doesn't wield it well, then the people can reject them and put the other one in, and they get their chance to be the hegemon, in a sense. But the problem is that leads to unjust policies, unfair practices, and non-democratic results. But you got to understand, the people who came up with the theory, the elite political scientists, and the people who put it into practice, the elite political people, politicos, those who run for office or who sit behind the scenes and run campaigns and run government, they didn't believe in democracy. And they weren't aiming at it. So they created a system that's intent was to have nothing but a choice of two elite chosen candidates. And this came into conflict only really in the 1960s. Now, you got to understand, the parties developed by accident in America, and they were always considered bad. Again, the Constitution, like I said, the Constitution was designed in a convention with the primary purpose to negate parties. You get the first government in existence, and you get Hamilton and Jefferson as the two competing players, Jefferson and Madison. And Hamilton, of course, recommended at the Constitutional Convention and was effectively laughed out of the room and went home for a while, that we have a strong executive-led central government, sort of like a monarchy. And he lost. But once he got in as Secretary of the Treasury, he began organizing votes amongst the Federalists. They weren't really organized as a party yet, but he began getting them to vote for his policies. His policies began transforming government to be executive-centered and executive-driven. In response, Jefferson and Madison being the architect of the Constitution, the guy who designed it in its major conceptual features, they saw the only route to defeating, now that we had this infection, the only route to defeating it is to create a party of our own, and that became what's the modern-day Democrats, the Democrat-Republican Party, originally known as Republican or Democrat or whatever. I mean, they didn't really have names so much because they weren't legitimate, and so they weren't really talked about favorably. But you have to understand, Madison wrote in the 10th Federalist paper that the mortal disease that has destroyed in history all forms of good government, and that is most prone to being caught in popular forms of government, is the disease of factionalism and the spirit of party and faction. And so, like I said, they created a constitution designed to negate the effects of that party spirit and that party motive force. And when Hamilton introduced it, the only way they could then negate that was to create a party themselves. Now, Jefferson declared upon his election victory in 1800 that this is the end of party government in America. And for a very brief period of time, he was correct, except for one unfortunate thing. His party created organizations and institutions, even though they were in early forms compared to what we have today, and those institutions remained. And that party then split into two, and the party battle began full force in the 1820s. And you had a series of attempts at reforms leading to the concept of primaries. Originally, presidents were chosen by congressional caucuses of congressmen. Then it went to state legislatures and state party caucuses in the legislatures. And then you had the early primaries. But by the 1960s, with all that was happening in the 60s, there was a demand from the public to democratize the process. Now, the problem is you can't democratize something that is inherently undemocratic, but they tried. And so in 68, the chaos in the street in the 68 convention led to what's known as the McGovern-Fraser Commission, which in 1972 established a whole new set of rules trying to make the nomination process more representative and more open to participation by the rank and file, the ordinary voter. The party elites, because of the context of the 60s, had to concede, and those rules were adopted. The problem is they were never implemented. And by 76, when you had Carter elected, the Democratic elites said, this system is producing bad results. They won the presidency, but they didn't like the president. The Democrats themselves destroyed Carter because Carter didn't give all of the perks and privileges to the national party, but to the state and local party structure that used to exist. So they created not a new set of rules, but a new strategy, which really came into play with Clinton. And that strategy was, and the Republicans had begun this, which was, even though we have this whole series of primaries, which the objective is to have a set of representative delegates go, very much like the Electoral College's original design, to a convention, have a discourse amongst many competing views within the party to find a candidate that's going to unify them all together, and that becomes the nominee. Instead of having that democratic almost process on it, fused on top of an undemocratic institution, they said, we can't win against the Republicans if during the primaries they announced before the primaries even get going that they've already chosen a nominee that's going to be anointed rather than nominated at the convention. He's already nominated, in fact, the presumptive nominee. National campaign then turns on the Democrats during that whole process of nearly a year of primaries where the Democrats are fighting each other and uses it against them. All the talk of, well, if you don't get out Bernie, you're going to harm Hillary when it comes to the general election. The Democrats said, well, we've got to do the same thing. And so, in effect, we have not had a real convention since about 1968, maybe 72. Maybe 76 even, had some features of it left. But the convention process has become nothing but a paid, publicly funded political advertising campaign for the party and its nominee that was not chosen in convention but conceded to at the beginning. And the people weren't really given choices to vote after Iowa or New Hampshire for anybody but the presumptive nominee. That system always relied on the willingness of the candidates within the party to step out, and they would step out because of the carrot and stick approach. If you step out, we will promise you, we'll give you a cabinet position, we'll give you this, we'll give you that, we'll make a deal, we'll even maybe guarantee that you'll get the next primary nomination nod. And if you don't, we will talk to all the big donors that you depend upon to get there, and we'll tell them we won't support you unless you withdraw the money. And so only the elite of the party chosen nominees would get the funds to carry them through to the convention, through the months of the primary battle. Now, Bernie Sanders has overcome that obstacle by appealing to a mass of people who are willing to give small dollar donations and keep him alive through the process, have all 50 states vote, and go to the convention where they're going to argue why the nominee should be him or at least not Hillary. Because that nominee is divisive within the party, divisive within the country, and will lose. And that's, in a sense, that was how the process is supposed to be. But it's not been allowed to be that way. Now, so you have this corrupt system, like a corrupt hard drive. It's not morally corrupt, it's structurally corrupt if you assume it's aiming towards democracy. Now you add two types of rigging. The first is what I just described. You don't let the process actually play out according to the rules. You basically, from behind the scenes, manipulate it so that it looks like the people are participating, but in reality, the choice was already determined by the elites before they ever gave you the opportunity to vote. Then you add to that the fact that Bernie has defiantly stayed in and played by the rules, that when it comes down to each state still is allowed to do a lot of the things on its own rules. And so when you go to seat the delegates, they play games as to say, even though Bernie Sanders may have earned through, you don't win or lose a primary battle, and that's a terrible way to describe it when the media says so-and-so won California or won New Hampshire. No, they earned so many percentage of the delegates to go to the convention to argue for their point of view in terms of aiming toward a nominee. And so when they go to seat the delegates, you get something like what happened in Nevada. The party chair stands up there, probably prompted by people from the National Party instructing her what to do, because the woman really doesn't know, like most people at state level, doesn't really know anything about what she's doing. She's just following instructions. And they said, when you get up there and you call for a voice vote rather than a tallied vote, declare, despite the fact that the noes have it, declare that the ayes have it, and then bang the gavel and close down the process, saying, the ayes have it according to my official ruling, bang the gavel, it's over, we win, and put more Hillary delegates into the convention than she earned, and take away Bernie delegates. Now you got to understand, from the beginning, America's had this kind of history. We forget that the Articles of Confederation, which was the original Constitution, was only supposed to be amended by a 100% vote, meaning consensus. All 13 states had to agree merely to amend it. Then you had an extra legal convention called the Philadelphia Convention in 1787 to propose amendments, but instead they drafted an entire replacement, and in their own machinations said, we will only require 3/4 of the states in order to ratify. So the Constitution at the time, the Articles of Confederation, required 13 states. They're going to replace the whole thing, not just amend it, and they're going to do it only with 9 states. Now, you get down to what the history that people really don't know. You go to the 9th state was New Hampshire. When New Hampshire ratified, the convention became the Constitution became officially law. A couple states still hadn't voted, and 2 were rejecting it. In particular, Rhode Island. Rhode Island held out, I think, till 1793. But when New Hampshire originally voted, it was the 7th state. And what people don't know is when their convention met and the vote was cast to reject the Constitution by a majority, the chairman of the convention banged his gavel after the vote took place, said convention is closed. We've stopped the convention, never recorded the vote even though it happened, and said no vote occurred. Then they came back after 2 more states ratified, and then they were going to be the 9th. They had new elections, got a new set of delegates more favorable to the Constitution, and more importantly, they locked 10 of those delegates in their boarding house and didn't let them go to the convention, and the Constitution passed by 10 votes. That's how the Constitution of the United States got ratified. I'll give you another example, very similar to what this chairman in Nevada did, the rigging. And again, it's got a long historical precedent. It's considered normal by the political elite, but it is rigged. When Massachusetts created its post-revolutionary state constitution, Massachusetts being very, this is where you had town hall meetings. I mean, this was direct democracy. So the elites gathered, proposed a constitution with several articles, and sent it to all the towns to ratify. And they were given instructions to vote on each article. Some of the towns rejected the entire thing from scratch, saying it doesn't represent our interests, it represents the elites of Boston, whereas we're the poor farmers, subsistence farmers in the West backcountry. We don't like it. It's executive centered. I mean, John Adams was the leading force in creating it, and he created it specifically for the elites to rule and to keep the rabble in check. And when the votes of each town convention were sent to the main tallying process, the people in the government counted all of the votes for each article, but for every town that rejected the entirety, they disregarded their vote. And so even though more towns voted against the Constitution, they played this little game and they declared it valid and enacted. That led, of course, to the first major uprising in American history, Shays' Rebellion, which was put down by military force, and is considered one of the factors that led to the Constitution of the United States replacing the Articles of Convention. But when you have that kind of a corrupted process with the addition of rigging it, you have the systemic corruption, and now you have the moral corruption, the corrupt actor. It leads to people going out on the street and rebelling and resisting. And that's what we saw that in '68, and we're seeing it again much further now.
If the rigging, if the votes can be rigged as easily and as openly as it's been done now, unchallenged apparently, from what we can see from the ringside seats that we've got, has the voting ever been fair?
Well, that's what I said. That's if there's anything that I can get through to the listener today, It's that even if the rules were followed 100% to a T, right, and it was a fair process within the rules are designed to be undemocratic. So if you expect it to be a democratic process, it's never going to be. And so it's corrupt and rigged.
Do you know?
And until Americans really grasp that, this problem is only going to fester. And what I argue that it's the dynamic that led to the American Civil War, and like I said, 2,000 years of political theorists said it's what led to the decline of the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, Athenian democracy, Roman Republic, and every other form of good government in history, whether it be democratic, republican, or not. Any form of government that was good, meaning it sought justice and the common good rather than the particular interest of those who ruled. Every time you let parties govern in the particular interests of the party. That's where we get the word party from. It means part of a whole. Instead of the interest of the whole being put forward, which is what we should be doing, the common good, which was rejected as a concept by political scientists when they created this theory, right? Instead of that being the aim is to win simple majority power, to grant it to one part of the country to rule in their self-interest. And then if the majority of the population rises up against that, they can be replaced by a different set of elites ruling in their particular set of interests in this ad infinitum process of never aiming at the common good and justice, always being one set of particular interests versus another. And this is a formula for disaster in the long run. And this country cannot survive eternally, specifically not with that. And it's not, I mean, America's only been around for 2 centuries. I mean, in world history, we're still in the infancy. And most countries most empires lasted far longer than that, but they were brought down by this very, very same dynamic. And so it's arrogant and ignorant for Americans to think that somehow we're exempt from that same historical set of phenomena. It's going to happen, and we see it happening. I mean, this election, more than any, is just pure divisiveness. Pure divisiveness. It's not only dividing the country, because half of the people say, no way Hillary because she's the Democrat, but it's dividing the Democrats who say, half of them say, no way Hillary because she's unprincipled or because she's more Republican. You know, I mean, it's dysfunctionality writ large.
Here's the thing. Most people who follow politics or who vote believe that politics are led by the people. The people go out to vote, and so they get the government that they vote for. But in vote rigging, and the way that you're explaining this, then this is not politics for the people, by the people, for the people. It's a whole nother ball game that's being played. Now, that's not even a question. That's just an observation from my point of view. I want to start getting down into a bit of nitty gritty. I've got a whole ball game to bring when it comes to Hillary, but I want to ask you a question. If this had been in any other environment, in any other arena, for any other purpose, could somebody like Donald Trump, with all that's going against him, with all that's coming out, right, about his behavior, his conduct, the rallies that have turned into riots, which is a word they don't particularly want us to use when it comes to Donald Trump, but they were. We had Andy Christopherson from Albuquerque on just the other week talking about the riots that took place in New Mexico, where there was even smoke grenades and stuff going on. Could somebody like Donald Trump expect to be able to withstand that much opposition, to have the gall to still be stood there claiming to be running for president. In any other place, would that be possible?
No. This is a result of the inherently broken nature of a two-party dynamic. It didn't produce Donald Trump. It produced.
Hi, are you there, Charlie? I think we're losing Charlie, and the unfortunate thing is because I actually haven't got David online, we're going to have to try and wait for Charlie to come back. We will get him back. But I'm just thinking to myself, really, at this moment in time, that if this had been a football manager, if this had been going for an ordinary 9-to-5 job or a position...
Have you lost me?
No, you're back now. I was just trying to rabble on until you came back. Are you there?
Yeah. I don't know. What was the last you heard? The answer is no. Trump would not have a. Trump is a product of this dysfunctional two-party process. He's not an aberration. He is exactly where that degradation of that process over time, which is inevitable when you have a corrupt process. It only becomes more corrupt over time and corrupts the country. But look, it didn't just produce Donald Trump this year. It produced 8 years of George W. Bush. The absolutely most unqualified person to have ever held any political office was the president of the United States 2 terms. So forget Trump. This process leads to that kind of thing and will lead only to worse over time. Look at who the Republicans continue to put up. I mean, Sarah Palin. I mean, my God. The woman is a nutcase. And on the Democratic side, what are you producing? You're producing Hillary Clinton? I mean, this is not the best and the brightest.
Talking about Hillary.
These are pure political hacks.
Yeah, hang on a minute,
Donald
Charlie.
Trump, a businessman looking for power.
Talking about Hillary Clinton, right? Do you think that the recent comment by Hillary that she has already won the Democratic election selection, even though the biggest state in the country, California, has not voted, is designed to hope people won't even vote?
Is designed for what?
It's designed to hope that people, or to encourage people not to vote if she's already claiming that she's already won the selection.
Well, no, not necessarily. It's designed to hope that people will just sheepishly follow and not revolt. It's not about whether as long as they vote for one of the two choices, that's fine. But they're not supposed to revolt and support a third party or an independent or someone like a Bernie Sanders. I mean, think about this. Think about it. And I really wish all those Hillary Clinton supporters who are so gung-ho would think about this. The last real good quality Democratic hopeful we had, and the last real semi-democratic nomination process we had. Like I said, it's a corrupt system, but when the rules were not being sort of tinkered with like they are today, was Bobby Kennedy in 1968, and he was taken out of the process with a bullet. But Bobby Kennedy during that process said something really important, something that ought to be the definition of what it means to be a Democrat. And he said, some people see things as they are and say why. But I dream things that never were and say, why not?
Yeah.
That's what a progressive Democrat stands for. And that is exactly the message that Bernie Sanders has put forward. And it is the message that Hillary Clinton laughed at, saying that's a joke, that's unrealistic, that's undesirable, that's revolution. And the Democratic Party establishment stood with her. We reject Bobby Kennedy's idealism for the practical win possibility of Hillary Clinton. Think about it.
Bernie Sanders.
If you want principled parties, this is not an example of one.
Absolutely not. And I mean, again, my ringside seat tells me that either of these two candidates, had they been going for the president of a conglomerate company or or a manager of a local store, and the things that have come out about them, which have came out, they wouldn't stand a chance. So my question still has to be, how could two individuals who have had so much negative publicity of corruption and lies, which have been found to be the truth about them, how are they still standing in a race that they should have dropped out of integrity a long time ago? How are they still in the race when they should have dropped out of it?
Because what's missing from the theory of the political scientists who created this as legitimate and the norm, this two-party process, what they failed to understand is the only way for that party process or the government process to produce the quality kind of result, the quality candidate, the quality nominee, or the quality president, or the quality Congress, is if, in this system, is if the norms of that quality are self-adopted by the elite. Once the elite drop the principles outright, there is nothing holding back the pure ego and egotist and egoist in politics from prevailing. Nothing.
There is a slight difference between...
Especially when very few of the best and brightest are willing to put up with what has become normalized as what a candidate has to go through. The best and the brightest don't run for office very often. Now, Bernie Sanders is one of those few who stands up for principle despite the pressures. But that's an aberration from the norm.
You know, here's the thing.
Because the process doesn't reward, but it punishes that kind of behavior and that kind of actor. It rewards the people who play the game, who make the deals, who put their principles at least on the back burner because they believe that somehow you have to get in to make a difference. So it all has to focus on getting in. Of course, once you get in, you have to stay in. So the principles never come back. But that's the sort of perverse logic that these people are using. So this system is tending towards that kind of that kind of outcome. The George Bushes and the Donald Trumps are the future, unless this process is substantially reformed. And I don't mean just making the rules enforced or making better rules, but getting to the core of the corruption of the system itself, the design to be undemocratic. That has to change. And that's the kind of stuff that Bernie Sanders is focused upon.
See, we have it slightly different here in the UK. So, whether it be the Labour Party or the Liberal Democrats or the Conservatives, the election process is still the same. So the leader of the Conservatives or the Labour wants to step down or has been dismissed or for whatever reason, then the members of the party are the ones who vote for who their leader is going to become. And anybody can throw their hat in, but they have to have certain amount of nominations, etc. And then they go into the next round if it's etc. And then once the leader of that party has been determined, then they go on the campaign trail to start drumming up the support long before an election. So by the time the election comes on to become the Prime Minister of this country, you already have an idea of who this guy is that's going to be representing you in your country. But what it appears to be over there in America is that the candidates are only brought forward at the time of the electoral campaign run. And then you're left with whoever that person is to bring it home. Now, here we have Bernie Sanders, and I'm not in America and I'm not an American, but on every social media site that I have been part of, Bernie Grant appears to be winning every argument hands down. And yet he still appears to be nowhere in the running. Now, I suppose some people quite easily say only in America. but I still can't get my head around how come two apparently corrupt, lying, deceiving, bigoted, arrogant, selfish, self-centered, egotistical morons still be leading the race for the White House.
Well, you got to understand, there's a fundamental difference between the UK Constitution, small c, and the American. And in the UK, your parties are what political scientists call and dream of for the US, but have never been able to get and will never be able to get because of our Constitution. Yet they try to think that they can somehow fudge around it. And that was a fundamental flaw. But you have strong parties. So the party dictates the agenda. And then the party picks candidates who agree to that agenda. Now, when the leadership or the agenda fails, the party disintegrates from within and withdraws itself from government by holding a new election and hope to realign everybody and make a new start of it. But in America, the concept of a strong party like that never had a chance. And since the theory was put out there that somehow we think we can get to that with fudging the rules and the process, the campaigns have become far more candidate-centered, particularly presidential campaigns. So the candidates raise their own money. The candidates have their own organizations. The candidates are out for the candidate, and they attempt to capture the party for themselves. Whereas in the UK, the party picks the candidates for the policy agenda that the party convention came up with. So it's a fundamentally different, I mean, it's apples and oranges.
Very much so, but it's politics. And the bottom line is politics are meant to be for the people. The people are meant to get an opportunity in any general election that gives them an opportunity to vote for the person that they believe is best suited to lead them into the next generation. And
Kervin, what I've been arguing to you today is that's a false premise. It is the premise that I hold politics ought to be, but it is not, in fact, the premise of the politics in terms of the institutionalized system that we have designed and playing its part today. This system is not intended for the people to rule, but to be ruled in such a way that they believe they are self-governing, so that they remain calm and don't rise up. In fact, another set of political scientists, Gabriel Alman and Sidney Verba, wrote a book based primarily on comparative politics, looking to the US and the UK in particular, and they came up with this argument of the civic culture that they think is epitomized particularly in Britain and the US. But really and that sounds really good, civic culture. But what they meant by that is that the people believe so strongly in the myth that they have a democracy that they don't rise up when they don't ever see that it's not really what is given to them. But since the myth is held on to by the people, they don't rise up in opposition. And what Alban and Verba were doing when they wrote that book was sending out a warning signal to the political class, saying, if you don't hold yourself to a certain set of norms, the fiction that this is a democratic process will become known. And when the veil of ignorance is lifted, the stability that they are measuring, that was their measure, stability. British government and U.S. government were stable. So that stability is lost because the myth has been what kept people in line all along. The myth is not what most people believe in anymore, more so this year than ever. And you, because now not only do you see the disaffected Democrats, the progressives, and the left who are supporting Sanders, but you even see that the Republicans have rejected the myth. The rank and file Republicans, they're tired of the game. They're tired of being manipulated like sheep, and they are rising up. And unfortunately, what they do is they latch on to a charismatic leader like a Donald Trump. And the danger in that is exactly what led to the charismatic leader coming to power through parties, contrary to political sciences, which says through multiple parties, but through parties. His name was Hitler. Yeah. And he rose up because of a disaffected population, tired of the status quo, tired of being sheep, and they're easily, a lot of them are easily captured and captivated by a charismatic leader like a Trump, especially one who's pointing the finger of, this is wrong, this is corrupt, this is bad. And even though he may go over the top in how he says it, most people say the same thing. The media is corrupt, the government's corrupt, politicians are corrupt. Well, that's all he's saying. And he's right. They are.
How much desirable. Yeah, how much of a role has the weakened hand played against the battle in the Middle East swayed in favor of Donald Trump, do you think, in America?
How much has what? I'm not sure I followed that.
Well, for me, I think the world seems to think that there's been a very soft-handed play in the Middle East. In the Middle Eastern regions and all of the issues that go with it, with the war that's going on out there and everybody else's response to it, and the fact that the backlash of the immigration, the war on terror, or the terror that's come to haunt you on your own home ground or homeland, so to speak, how much of that has played a role in Donald Trump rising to such prominence?
Well, I think it's playing some role, although, I mean, again, I don't think it's the primary cause.
So then, what is giving Donald Trump such a popularity?
That the average American, I mean, you mentioned about how few people vote in Britain. The U.S. is like in last place in so-called democratic countries, and of course the word democracy there is a redefinition from the actual thing. But even if we use that redefined concept, American participation is lower than almost every other.
I get that, but doesn't the fear of Donald Trump actually get into power make everybody who can possibly vote want to get up and go and vote just to make sure that he doesn't?
No, because don't you understand? Most people think that they're afraid of the people who are getting in regularly. And what the Republicans who are voting for Trump are saying is it's not just the Hillary Clintons and the Bill Clintons and the Obamas, although they do think that they're evil.
Look,
it's even their side.
Let's just get it right. Donald Trump is a millionaire, playboy, charismatic. Hillary Clinton has the history of Bill and all that goes with that. And poor old Bernie is kind of punching above his weight, but is the only genuine contender with a real passion for the people of America and to further and progress it into the next century and generation. I cannot understand how there is such an outpouring of scorn and deliberate attempts to humiliate him and stop him from stepping into a role that I believe, personally, as a ringside seat observer, was designed and destined to be his.
Because the longer you allow a corrupt system to be deemed legitimate and be the norm, the longer over time that goes, the more problematic it gets, to the point where people are looking for a quick fix. It is so out of control. It is so bad. The average person in America, I'm not talking about the people who participate regularly in political primaries, and I'm talking about the people who tend not to vote at all, which is the majority of the country. when that system is allowed to continue on, despite those warning signs, it will produce these kind of extremes. And frankly, Donald Trump is tame in comparison to what it will potentially produce in the future.
I have seen a series, and this is not propaganda. This is not, somebody else's telltale and he said, she said. I have seen a series, I've posted them myself, of Hillary videos where almost everything she says she's for, at some point or another, she has actually verbalized herself live and has proven to be against, and it's proven to be a lie. Now, I keep asking...
Because that's the norm.
But how on earth could that
That's
still
the
be
norm,
acceptable even for those who are voting for her? Surely there is an alarm bell ringing saying, well, hang on a minute. This woman speaks with forked tongue, doesn't speak truth. How on earth can you take her seriously on anything she says?
Because here's the elite versus the ordinary person divide. Ordinary people see it for what it is. They get disgusted by it. Elites are told, if you want to join the club, you've got to accept that that's the norm and that's how things are. Look at how the American media frames the following about this primary process. You keep hearing the word pivot. Hillary needs to pivot, and Bernie's not letting her pivot. What does pivot mean? It means that she's so focused on telling the Democrats that she's on the left that she's not getting a chance to tell the Republicans that she really isn't on the left, but she's for them and she's on the right. So the media is saying Bernie is harming Hillary because he's not allowing her to lie, but to lie within the normal framework of what we considered acceptable. It's the necessary lie. Lies are lies. And when you have a system that's fundamentally centered on the fiction and manipulating the public with those lies, it leads to this kind of revolt of the masses. And those masses are revolting toward Trump, toward Bernie, and it didn't just occur this year. This has been building since '68, and you really saw it in 2004 with Howard Dean, who laid the foundation, ironically, for the style of campaign that Bernie is successfully running. The idea that you don't have to be beholden to the party masters for your money to be able to be viable in the process and stay until the convention. We're at the convention, you see, and this is what the media is ignoring, consciously ignoring on some part, but most of the people who are reporting this stuff are ignorant about politics. Most of them don't even know what politics was like 10 years ago, let alone 20, 30, 40, 50, or throughout the history of this country. And most of them just learned to memorize. This is what we report every election cycle, so you report the same thing. Thus you get the pivot story. When does Hillary get to pivot? Well, there never was a pivot until the 80s and Clinton, Bill, with the idea of short-circuiting the process and determining the nominee in the beginning of the primary season rather than at the convention. See, the convention is supposed to be a deliberative, representative process where a multiplicity of voices, not really based upon candidates, but based upon policy positions, are supposed to get together and say, hey, if we want to win for our principles and our policies, we argue the following things should be done. And we've got to find a candidate who stands for the united views of our consensus that's built at the convention. This short-circuiting doesn't let that happen. And instead they try to impose unity by saying, but she's not him. And the Democrats, not the Republicans, so you must vote for the Democrat. Well, that's unsound logic. That's bad practice, and it leads in the end to the destruction of the country.
Absolutely.
Yet it's the norm.
And it's the norm. And there's going to come a time where if one of these two get into power, that America are going to wish that they woke up, smelt the coffee, and did something to change the outcome of what this election is going to be. Do you think that Bernie Sanders could still win this?
Well, yes, because you see, that's the other thing people are ignoring. The convention, despite the fact that for 20 years or almost 30 years, it hasn't been used other than as an advertising. Listen, I was at the 2004 convention. The delegates had no role other than as props on the floor. In fact, the party elite had a team of people. If you had a T-shirt that said one of the other candidates that was in the primary process other than the nominee, they surrounded you with people with proper T-shirts and signs so the cameras couldn't see you. One girl, she must have been about 12 years up, stood up with a sign. I think it was something about her pony, but it wasn't on the script. And they escorted her out of the convention, a 12-year-old girl. But the convention rules still exist. Now, they'll do the rigging system. They will try to use their power. They're going to appoint all the loyalists to all the key positions and all the committees. They're going to try and not play by the rules. But the Sanders delegates can invoke the rules, and they will. And the Sanders delegates can put up a fight on the convention floor and in the halls of the hotels where the backroom machinations go on. And this is going to be a dynamic, knockdown, drag-out fight at that convention. And yeah, Bernie could win. The odds are against him because the game is fixed and everything's stacked against him. But you can fight and win. You have to fight. And they keep telling Bernie and his supporters, you shouldn't fight. And thank God, someone has finally stood up and say, we're going to fight. Okay. And we're going to take this to Philadelphia. And we're going to make an issue out of this.
So
now, if the Democratic Party were wise, and if it concluded that even though, a candidate like Bernie being viable comes around once in a lifetime if you're lucky, and the fact that the Democrats are thumbing their noses at that is disgusting to me and absolutely incomprehensible. But the point is, if they keep saying, but we don't want Trump and we have to win, well, recognize the fact. Hillary is divisive even within the party. If you nominate her, you're going to lose. And so at the convention, if the Democratic Party were wise, it would stand up and say, if it doesn't want to give it to Bernie, you need to find a third way. And that is part of the rules. In fact, that's what the convention was there for. The convention, the convention, it hasn't had a purpose when you have everybody in line at the beginning. But the convention does have an established purpose, and that's it. And
they've put up Hillary and Bernie as the two candidates going head to head, right? And only one of them is going to get through, right?
Well, no, they didn't put it up. What they did was the Democratic Party very consciously for the past 4 years, if not 8, has made deals with every other member of the Senate and the House and all of the states that are Democrats. You're going to support Hillary, and we're not going to have a contest. And Bernie Sanders upset the apple cart and said, I'm going to step in and make it a contest. And all the party elite said, well, you're not going to get anywhere because you're the socialist from Vermont that's been an independent, and you don't have anybody to support you with money. And he said, I got these millions of people who are going to do it. And that's upset the apple cart. But they didn't give two options. The party has worked hard to ensure Hillary got the nomination long, long before this election season began. And it backfired on them, as it should have been understood would happen. if you try to impose upon the people a candidate, you better find a candidate that's not fundamentally divisive within your own party.
Yeah.
So Clinton cannot unify the party. She absolutely cannot. Now, a lot of people will vote against Trump for Hillary, but not enough.
You know,
a lot of the
last week,
Bernie's not on the.
Yeah, last week on our show.
Bernie's not on the ballot.
Yeah, last week on the
Yeah, go
show.
ahead.
Last week on the show, Dr. David put it to our guest Tripper Simmons, who was on, an activist, and basically said, you know, those who are voting for Bernie are going to be responsible for letting Donald Trump into the White House. And there are many.
And I would have answered to him, and I wish he was on today to say that to me, because I would have said, no, sir, you're wrong. If you put up a nominee knowing that half the party isn't going to support her, then you're responsible if she loses. If you put up a person who will not unify the party and expect her to somehow pressure everybody into doing it because of the other guy, you're going to fail. It's arrogance.
And do you think that they're actually arrogant enough to have believed that there was a possibility that that's what they might have been able to accomplish?
Yes, because they've done it before. The problem is the people have caught on, and over the past several decades have been abandoning it.
And
here's
sorry, one thing, Charlie. Here's the other thing that I truly fundamentally believe, that those people who have come alongside Bernie Sanders and have committed to voting for him would not be seen dead voting for Hillary Clinton.
I predicted almost a year ago that Bernie Sanders would have a strong support, would be in it to the end, and that 25% of his supporters will not vote for Hillary. But 25% probably will vote holding their noses for whoever the Democrat is to defeat the Republican before it was even Trump. And then 50% were up for grabs. And that every time Hillary speaks and every time the Democratic Party acts against Bernie or contemptuously of his support base, that 50% is being eroded. And even some of that 25% that were guaranteed to hold their noses are abandoning it. And the polls have been, polls are really not as scientific as people think when they're used for day-to-day news. That's not what polls are meant to do. But the polls have supported what I've said. A couple months ago, 25% said no. And rather than eroding away as it becomes more and more so-called inevitable, and Trump is so-called more inevitable, the Republican nominee, it's only grown. And so now a third of the Bernie support base is saying, we will not vote for Hillary. And I think by November, if Hillary is on the ballot, it's going to be larger than that.
Some people are
and
even.
So
some people.
if the Democrats
Charlie.
nominate Hillary, yeah.
Some people are even saying that it may need Donald Trump to go into power, just to show just how bad things are, to get America back on track again. Would you agree with that?
Yes. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that, and it's often true. Sometimes you have to have a short-term, you have to lose a battle in order to win a war. And you have to have a short-term defeat in order to have a long-term victory. And in particular, people think Trump is going to be, oh my God, it's going to be, look, we had 8 years of Bush, which was much worse than what Trump would be. Trump is not inherently a Republican. He leans toward the policies of the Democrats far more. He's not a party loyalist. In fact, he's not a professional politician. He's a professional egomaniac.
But there's still
the Republican Party on its heels the entire 4 years he's in there. The Republican Party will be spinning. The Democrats, of course, will waste the opportunity trying to say, well, we told you it should have been Hillary, rather than saying, my God, this is a blessing in disguise, because it's not about who's president. Stand up. They say, well, what about the Supreme Court? Well, the president doesn't unilaterally pick the Supreme Court. The Senate has to consent. If you don't like the Republicans picking, the Scalias of the world, vote against them. The Republicans vote against milquetoast people that the Democrats keep putting up. And yet the Republicans put these absolutely judicial idiots. I mean, intelligent idiots.
Is that the saving grace for the American public? Is the fact that even though somebody like Donald Trump could get into power, there's very little that he can do unless the Senate agrees with him?
Yeah, exactly. And the House. In terms of policies, you need the House and Senate. In terms of foreign policy and one of the things is we've allowed the presidency to grow out of control in terms of its power, and we've allowed the Congress to be nothing less than just the support of the president. It was never intended to be there. Maybe this is a great opportunity to reassert the power and authority of Congress to lead the nation rather than the president, and to subordinate the president into the second-class position it was meant to be. The president is not supposed to be the driving force of government. That's a party concept. Of course, the Constitution was designed to negate parties, not to put them in the center of power.
Okay.
So the presidency is not supposed to be driving the government.
Before we round up on the is it rigged or not, and give our verdict, I want to look at a couple of scenarios. Let's say Donald Trump wins the White House, the race to the White House, and goes into, the White House, Washington, D.C. What do you think happens to America?
I think the same thing that happens if Hillary gets in, just with a different twist. You're going to see riots on the street. I think unless a candidate like a Bernie Sanders gets in, that's what you're going to get. I think we're about to see is going to make 68 look tame. I think what we're going to see at the convention is going to make it look tame. I think you saw it on the streets where the Mexican Americans were pelting the Trump supporter with tomatoes and stuff. I think that's going to pale in comparison to what's not only going to be seen on the streets of Cleveland and Philly, but it's going to be seen on the streets of America 4 to 8 years.
Okay,
I think this country is in bad shape.
Okay. Another question: how will Donald Trump fare on international affairs if he was to get into the White House?
Well,
bearing in mind, he's not actually had many positive things to say about any other countries, nationalities, nations, or leaders of those countries. Bearing in mind, he's not had a real good word to say about anybody else. How do you think he will handle America's standing in world affairs, and how will he fare on the international platform?
I'd like to say that the world leaders would reject him openly. I said that they would likely do that with George Bush. And instead, they all pretended he was legitimate and said, he'll only be here for 4 years, and then said, oh, my God, it's 8, but we can make it through the 8. I hope the world leaders have a backbone and the world governments have a backbone and stand up and say to America, you're not worthy of this standard of leader of the free world that you've given yourselves. And we reject it, because that American arrogance has gotten America and the world into most of the trouble of the last half of the 20th and the beginning of the 20th. The arrogance of American power. I hope America goes down 10 notches on the world scale in terms of its influence. I think that would be a good thing.
Now, bearing in mind that Bill Clinton managed to get away with his oval discretion while President of the United States of America and lied to the country and the Senate and everybody else when they were close to impeaching him.
They were never close to impeaching him.
Well,
It was never.
it was never close. Well,
Not really. Meaning, it depends on what you define impeaching. I mean, technically, he was impeached in the process, but the impeachment didn't lead to his removal.
no, it
kind of
didn't.
a thing.
Okay.
Yep.
Now, bearing in mind that he already has that history behind him, and now here's his wife running for president, and already coming out of the woodworks are all of these little interviews and all of these little emails and all of these little videos and all of this stuff that is showing her to be the absolute wrong choice for leader of this country. If she was, by default or any other means, to get herself into the White House and become the next President of the United States of America, how do you think she will fare on the international stage, knowing that every other leader around the world knew that her country didn't want her?
Well, unfortunately, again, the world leaders have shown that they don't really have much balls when it comes to standing up to America. And more likely than not, they will just nod their head and allow America, whoever the president is, Clinton, to play the same role it it has in the last, half century, post World War II. But what you will find is that it will be 4 years of 24 hours a day, non-stop non-issues of Hillary this and attack Hillary that and Hillary that. And non-issue doesn't mean that there's no credibility, although I would say 90% of the stuff that's tossed out there has no credibility and 10% does. And unfortunately, the 10% of substance gets lost in the nonsense. But it will be the most unproductive 4 years in American history. She will not be able to do anything within this country. And what I fear is that the one place she will be able to have effect is on the international stage. And this is a woman who openly embraces the philosophy of foreign policy of Henry Kissinger. And that's dangerous.
Wow. Now, is the voting rigged? Was the question we started at the beginning of this show. And so far we've talked about the whys and why-fors of Donald Trump. We've talked about the whens and when-nots of Hillary Clinton. And we've even talked about the how-comes of Bernie Sanders. Now, it's clear, again, let me reiterate, on what we see evidentially coming out on campaigns, on the road, feedback via social media and everything else. Bernie Sanders is winning the people hands down. If Bernie Sanders is winning the people hands down, how come he's not winning Congress, who are responsible for electing their front runners?
Because Congress isn't responsible for that. But and again, as I said, look, is the system rigged? Meaning, is the system intentionally seeking to ensure that Hillary gets the nomination? Absolutely, yes. Are they violating the rules to get there? Yes. But that's minor, because if the rules were followed, the rules were designed themselves to ensure that Hillary gets the nomination. This is a process that was designed to have the elites of the parties choose and the rank and file follow, not for the rank and file to make the choice. And anybody, I don't care if you support Hillary, if you don't recognize that, you are placing blinders on yourselves that are preventing you from fixing the problems with the process, and not just the party, but the country, not just for this election cycle, but for the future. This is an undemocratic process by design.
Absolutely. Shouldn't Congress have stepped in a long time ago?
No, Congress has no business. In fact, unfortunately, since the late 60s, the federal government has attempted to regulate the parties with laws, but that's only made the parties more quasi-official rather than purely private. The parties should be pure private organizations. They should have no recognition in Congress. They should have no recognition in government. They should have no recognition on the ballot. You shouldn't have a party label on the ballot. You shouldn't have to or be able to register with a party with the government. That's a private affair and a private entity. But Congress has no business in this.
You know, here's the thing. If
the person gets elected, then Congress should stand up. And, of course, if Trump got elected, Congress should stand up, united Republicans and Democrats together. But you can see the concept of party, the role of party is so perverting that all the Republicans are joining on and saying, party before principle, party before people, party before the public good, party before nation. And that's what the Hillary people and the Democratic Party want all the Bernie people to do, and to be just as hypocritical. But when you see Paul Ryan and you see, all these other Republicans who have honestly said what Trump is, all of a sudden say, but we have to support him, you can see how dysfunctional this process is. And it's just as dysfunctional on both sides of the aisle.
Where do you think it's going to take us to? Let me put it this way. Hang on one second, Charlie. Let me put it this way. You see, in this country, politicians are not just accountable to the people of the nation. They're also accountable to the House that they represent. So, for example, we have the Houses of Parliament, and you have Congress, right? And so, therefore, if a politician was to bring the House into disrepute, if a politician was to be found conducting himself in an illegal matter, first he will be prosecuted, and secondly, he would have to stand down from his seat, give up his locality, and will not be able to stand again. Now, what I can't understand is, and I'm going to say it again because we're still not getting an answer, is that these two, in particular, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton, have been found out and called out time and time again during this campaign, and yet nothing appears to be done to bring them back into line and bring politics back into a healthy position where people can actually respect the democracy of what it's supposed to stand for. Now, surely Congress has a responsibility to bring about some good practice, some sound practice, some good conduct, reputable conduct, as well as reputable candidates that are standing for the presidency of the United States of America.
Kervin, if there were a process in America that removed from public office all those who brought the nation into ill repute, you'd have to remove 90% of the Congress and almost everybody who's been president since the 1970s.
And maybe it's because you haven't had that since the 1970s, the democracy had gone out the window.
Like I said, democracy was never on the table to start with when we got to the 1970s. What's happened since then has taken what little semblance we had and what little reform we made toward it and turned it on its head.
Still here in this country,
we are
in particular,
from democracy now than we ever have been in America.
Agreed. Hillary Clinton is slightly excusable, not in my book, but to some people. But when it comes to someone like Donald Trump, there is not a single person that you speak to in this country that is not absolutely flabbergasted that the man could actually have the gall, the audacity to stand for president, let alone be nominated by his fellow peers to run for the presidency of the United States of America. Now, surely...
But when you keep nominating and you keep attempting to nominate and you actually putting some of them into office, these people who have no business in that office, whether we're talking about Bill or Hillary Clinton, or we're talking about Donald Trump at the most extreme, or George Bush even more extreme, or half the people that have run the last couple election cycles in the Republican nominating process. I mean, it's a joke. I mean, you got one candidate that saved the light bulb because, oh my God, the tyranny of Congress was trying to do away with incandescent light bulbs, and we've got to protect the interest of the outdated dinosaur of the incandescent light bulb. I mean, that was Michelle Bachmann. I mean, these people are treated as serious candidates. The media all of a sudden treats Donald Trump as this unserious candidate. Well, hey, you should have started treating people like Sarah Palin, George W. Bush, Michelle Bachmann as such from the start. When you legitimated them, you opened the door to Donald Trump. And you know what? Donald Trump is not as outrageous as a Sarah Palin, is not as stupid as a Michelle Bachmann. People are focused on the show. And Donald Trump is putting on a show. But what he's doing is he's outplaying the players in the game. The problem is that the game is the problem. And it's not be a better player. It's get rid of the game. That's the solution. Because as long as you keep playing this game, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. You're going to, you didn't have to get Trump. Like I said, you had Sarah Palin as the vice presidential nominee of the Republican Party recently. Sarah Palin. I mean, the woman has no business being on a
she has
local
no morals.
Town council. Forget about the no morals. That half of them have no morals. No, 3/4 of them have no morals. And in fact, the ones who started out with them were taught that they're not supposed to, and that morals will get you nowhere. But these people have no clue. See, Donald Trump has a clue. It looks like he doesn't. But, people are underestimating and over-demonizing him. I'm not saying he's good. What I'm saying is he's not as bad in the ways that people are saying. Yeah. The danger in Donald Trump is far more subtle than his overt personality.
Well,
but those problems
here's the thing.
Are far worse.
Here's the thing. We are talking on Issues Today, and asking the question, is the voting rigged? And on debate.org, which has been running a survey on the US elections, would you believe me if I told you that 89% of those who have responded have agreed and said yes, the American US elections are rigged?
I can't believe there's 10% of people who wouldn't say yes.
In this country, I say again, we are left absolutely gobsmacked that an unintelligent buffoon, a no-knowledge, totally politically unaware psychopath actually believes he has an opportunity to become the next president of America. And here's the thing.
I'm sorry, are you talking about the guy that was in office for 8 years prior to Obama?
Well, there's him too, but, more importantly...
That's my point, Kervin. That's my point. We had 8 years of an absolute buffoon in the office.
Yeah.
And we had not just the media, not just the Republicans, but the Democrats legitimize him. So are you surprised that you now get a Trump?
I think that Trump was always in the making, don't you?
It was inevitable for it to come to this.
Do you know?
It surprised me how fast it happened.
So here we are coming to the end of the show, and I would have imagined that some way, somehow, we've managed to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that the voting process in the United States of America is rigged.
But I would say you have to understand it's rigged on top of a corrupt foundation, so it's worse than that.
And here in the United Kingdom, we feel so sorry for what you are left to have to live with should either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, as it appears might well be, become the next president of the United States of America.
I keep asking people to wake me up when it's over.
Maybe that's what everybody's going to have to happen to everybody, because it's going to be a very sad state of affairs. Charlie, I'm going to leave you a couple of minutes to just round this up. We're at the end of the show. Here's a couple of minutes for you to just round it up before I say my goodbyes and we go off into the land of well, here it would be sleep. I've just done a 12-hour stand-up shift, so I'm a bit tired myself, but I've really enjoyed this time that we've shared today. But here's take a couple of minutes to just round off what you want to say and what you want to get across to those that are listening right now.
Well, there are three things. The best bumper sticker by far I've seen out there in this campaign season has not been for any of the candidates, but for a giant meteor to put an end to it already, please. And frankly, that's how a lot of people in America are viewing it, including myself. The second is, I cannot emphasize more that I don't care whether you're for Hillary or for anybody else, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, an independent, a green, or libertarian, learn the history of this country, learn the philosophy that it was founded upon, learn what it really was meant to be, and begin to critically analyze what's wrong, because something is seriously wrong. And this election cycle only demonstrates it. Even if you are pro-Hillary, you ought to recognize that. And more importantly, we need a process. We need parties, although I'd eventually like to get rid of parties altogether in the sense of there being legitimate forces in government. But we need a party that's going to stand up for principles and candidates like, and I don't care whether they're Republican, Democrat, or what, but like Bobby Kennedy, who had the courage and conviction, like one other person who died last night, who was, I mean, if we can have a boxer who is that intelligent, that courageous, and that morally sound in his principled foundation, why can't we have a president like a Muhammad Ali? But we should have a process that produces rather than rejects the principles of a Bobby Kennedy when he said that some people see things as they are and ask why, and he dreams of things that never were and says why not. We need to be standing up for people like a Bernie Sanders who have stood up to the system and succeeded when very few other have. I don't care whether you're a Democrat or Republican or independent. That's a man to be admired, not to be torn down the way the Democratic Party and Hillary Clinton has done.
Absolutely.
And this process is corrupt, and that's why it rejects that.
Charlie, I want to just thank you for joining us on World Jam Global Radio's Issues today. on the subject matter of is the voting rigged, on a day when a legend such as Muhammad Ali, an ambassador for the United States of America, somebody who carried the flag, who burnt the torch, who lit the way, who set an example, who showed the charismatic nature of what it was to be an American. On the day that we lost a real hero, we're asking you, listeners and audience around the world, to pay attention to what's going on in America today, because you let someone like Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton into that Oval White House, the dreams of dreamers are going to be all that you're going to be left with. This is Kervin Julien on Issues Today on World Jam Global Radio, saying thank you for listening. We'll be back at our normal time next Saturday, 6 p.m. GMT, 1